43. Undone. A world all wrong fell away as Emilia leaned close to hear Nox's whispered words.
I, Nox, son of the sky, release you, Emilia, from our bond. You are your own once again, and I return to myself, and we both remain the skies.
Her hot tears dripped onto Nox's hands, mixing with his dried blood and creating fresh rivulets.
Shh, shh,
he tutted, then grimaced.
I'm sorry for everything.
She lifted her head up and met his gaze.
You're sorry?
He tried to smile again through his swollen features, but a spasm of pain made him gasp.
Sorry, we didn't have more time. Sorry, I wasn't there for you, for our child.
She bowed her head. Shouts sounded outside, and Terran flashed her a worried look. Nox squeezed her hand, a faint pressure only. She looked back at him.
Say the words,
he whispered. She shook her head.
I know you love me.
His body convulsed, and she held him through it.
You have to let me go. Please.
How could she deny him anything he wanted in this moment? Emilia pressed her forehead to his as gently as she could, and whispered through her tears.
I, Emilia, daughter of the sky, release you, Nox, from our bond. You are your own once again, and I return to myself, and we both remain the skies. I will always love you.
She pressed her lips to his as softly as she could, taking in his breath one last time. Nox heaved a sigh and went limp. Terran pulled her to standing even as her body was taken by tremors. She could hear Terran speaking, urging her forward, but she couldn't make out the words. She tried to blink free the tears from her eyes, but as one spilled, the next clouded her vision.
Nox.
Her heart imploded with grief. Terran's hand around hers was her only link to this world as he led her through the curtain and step by step further from where Nox lay, alone and breathing his last. A part of her mind wanted to stand and stomp her feet, demanding the world halt and give her answers. But life did not stop for grief, instead spinning around her in a flurry. Terran entered the common space with a long pole in one hand. Any who drew near fell. She should have been afraid, but no other emotion could squeeze its way through the numbing sorrow clouding her mind. They drew up short, and Terran cursed. She stumbled into him, and he reached to steady her. Two bodies lay at their feet, left where they'd been killed. Terran gently pushed her backward to keep her from the blood slowly creeping across the floor. She caught a glimpse of silver manacles binding their hands and ankles, the same as Nox was wearing. The clothing looked familiar. Emilia sucked in a sharp breath. Hayden and Merrill. Each of the overseers had been relieved of their heads, and the woven mats hungrily soaked up the pooling blood. She turned away as her legs turned to rubber and her stomach heaved.
They weren't killed long ago,
Terran mumbled, and Emilia retched again, spilling the contents of her last meal.
Hayden, Merrill,
was all she could say through the shock.
Why are they doing this?
I don't know, Terran said as he kept his head on a swivel, scanning the open space. No one was visible, but the sounds of scuffling feet and bodies moving echoed softly against the domed ceiling. His voice dropped to a rough growl. They are not nearly as afraid as they should be, though. Streaks of blue energy cut through the air next to them. Terran moved with inhuman speed and flipped a heavy table, pulling her down behind it as bolts of energy sizzled against the barrier. Will you be okay here for a minute? He asked, giving her a worried look. She nodded and wiped her mouth on her sleeve, even as her eyes strayed back to the fallen overseers. Terran pushed a thick, stunted pike into her hand and noticed her attention on the slow-moving puddle of blood. He gently tipped her chin away from the sight back to him. The warmth of his amber eyes held her for a moment.
"It's going to be okay, Em. Hang on, okay?"
She looked at the worry lines crumpling his brow and the downward set of his mouth, and felt her mind ground itself in his features. She felt the worn ridges in the wood under her fingertips and tightened her grip. A flicker of her earlier anger reignited. More overseers paying the price for others' ambitions. Nox had already paid the price, twice over. Now they would threaten Terran? Hadn't she set out to protect those who served the Mercurials selflessly? Emilia's thoughts cleared. Grief would have to wait. She needed to fight. Her vision narrowed, and she met Terran's look.
"I'm okay,"
she said, pleased to find her voice steady. He flashed her a wicked look. "I'll make them pay," he assured. She nodded as he leapt clear of the table, dodging another volley of fire smattering the barrier. She watched him soar through the domed space and listened as the bolt fire first quickened, then stopped suddenly. She peeked over the table in time to see Terran stalk toward two soldiers ducking behind a screen for cover. He picked up the screen with such a casual motion he could have been tossing a twig aside. The Timolsians scrambled back, but with a flash of speed he snagged them both by their necks and held them aloft. They kicked against the grip, powerless against him. A chill snaked down Emilia's spine, seeing the raw, unleashed power of the sky. Terran could have easily crushed their windpipes, but instead he clanged the two raiders together and released them in a senseless heap. He moved through the room as a tempest, dropping all who stood against him. Emilia eyed the path to the main entrance. For the moment, it was clear. Terran held the full attention of those within the building. Using what little cover she could find, she crept across the open space until she reached the heavy canvas of the outer wall. Tension gave way to relief as she pressed herself behind a pillar. Sounds from outside caught her attention, and she pressed her eye to a loose seam and looked out. Their hovercraft was nowhere to be seen, and neither was Connor. Her heart sank.
He was so young.
The mostly empty courtyard at their arrival was now a mass of movement. Troops ran in ordered groups, forming lines, orienting themselves around the structure.
"For stone's sake,"
she muttered as the heavy hovercraft started moving from the perimeter towards them. She turned from the peephole and looked for Terran. He jumped over one of the dividing screens, surprising another group from above. As he landed, he stumbled to his knee, and Emilia's stomach clenched. Terran regained his footing and engaged the small group, but what had looked effortless moments earlier was now subdued as he relied on skill, not brute strength. As he swung a long pole into the last raider, his arm blurred with speed, strength clearly returning. Crushing grief pressed in on her at the reality of what was happening.
"Nox!"
She looked across the space to the curtain-doored room. Inside there, alone on the floor, he was dying. She couldn't leave him behind like a story of the past. With desperation she could no longer restrain, she darted from cover back into the open. Across the room, Terran saw her and shouted a warning. Two sentries stepped from behind a screen and stood between her and the curtained door. She dashed to a stack of dividers folded for storage and pressed her back to solid wood as she turned to face her attackers. She lifted her pike as she would a small knife and set her stance. The first soldier laughed and made a comment in Timolsian to his partner. He dragged a shard of metal that looked more scrap than weapon, but against its dark patina, dried blood caught the light.
"He killed Hayden and Marrel with that."
Emilia's stomach churned. The other sneered at his friend's joke and spread his arms as they closed in, obviously expecting her to bolt. The long pole he carried extended his reach by more than double. A tingle of fear ran through her, but she squeezed the pike tighter and raised it high. With a bellow, Terran descended through the air towards them. He crashed into the first raider, tackling him from behind. The bloodied piece of metal clattered to the ground as the two tumbled in a heap. As they rose, they were evenly matched, strength once again leaving him. Emilia cast a fearful glance at the curtained room.
"Hang on, Nox."
The other raider closed the space between them and swung his long pole in a dangerous arc. She caught the motion at the last moment and lifted her pike, parrying the blow. She caught the shaft enough to redirect it, but the brunt of the momentum slipped to the side and took her in the shoulder. She grunted as her clavicle seared with pain and her left arm hung numb. A cruel grin split the angular features of her attacker as he circled. She followed his movement, but he held the advantage of angles and cut her off with a step. Her eyes darted towards Taryn, still wrestling with the other raider. "Breathe." Nox's words from a lifetime ago flooded back. "Move slow, think fast." He'd demonstrated the various positions for defending against longpole attacks and had walked her through them countless times. Emilia channeled the calm of those moments. She'd been safe, secure. Nox's encouraging smile had always melted her frustration. "Watch their feet." Her breath loosened, and she brought the pike back up in a defensive position, settled. The raider gloated in his thick tongue. Emilia's eyes narrowed. She waited. The raider thrust forward in a fully committed strike. She slipped the blow, trusting the laws of motion, and spun through. Unable to readjust, the man drove himself onto her awaiting stake. A stunned expression replaced the smug certainty. He stumbled back, dropping his pole and ripping the piece of wood out from under his ribs. Emilia stepped back out of range and clucked her tongue. "That was a mistake," she said, raising a brow at the pike in his hand. The man dropped to his knees and clutched at his chest before toppling over. Emilia turned to see Taryn on top of the other soldier. A sheen of sweat covered his face. He kept his weight low, his legs managing his balance while the man beneath him struggled. She stood, frozen, watching the contest unfold before her. Taryn hazarded a look in her direction, but the momentary distraction was all that emotion needed. With a violent lurch, the man arched to one side and the two rolled. With Taryn flat on his back, the soldier came at him like a man possessed, and it took his whole attention to keep the wild man from pinning his arms. Emilia shouted a warning as she realized the Tumulcian's intention. He had angled Taryn towards the fallen shard of metal. In a quick motion, he lunged from Taryn's torso and seized the weapon, heaving the blade overhead and down toward Taryn. Emilia squeezed her eyes shut against the inevitable impact, but instead of the sound of metal embedding in flesh, she heard an empty clang. Her eyes opened to Taryn standing a few feet away. It defied explanation. "Nox." Taryn wiped at his brow and leveled the raider with a deadly look. "You killed those overseers, bound and helpless." The soldier's throat bobbed as he swallowed in fear. With effort, he lifted the metal scrap aloft in a defensive pose. Taryn grabbed a folded screen panel. Twisting his whole body, he flung the solid piece of wood two-handed. It cut through the air like a skipping stone and took the soldier in the chest. Hardly slowing, it pulled him across the room and crashed into one of the makeshift walls. The sound of wood splintering and panels collapsing echoed throughout the dome. In the silence that followed, they could hear shouts of command being given outside. Taryn straightened and heaved a breath. "We have to go," he said. "He may only have moments. I can feel it." "I can't leave him," Emilia said, trying to pull away. Taryn wrapped her in a hug. "I know," his voice cracking. "But it's now or never, Em." "He deserves more than to be left on a dusty floor," she choked out. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I promise to see you safe, and I'm not failing him again." He scooped her into his arms and ran for the door.